Hi everyone, welcome back to Sociology. Now we're going to look at culture. Now remember, what we've done is look at the beginning, at the history of some sociology, and then we looked at the research bit. So everything from here on, just be alert that when we talk about data, this is all about the stuff that's based on research. So it's not just a belief or an opinion. All right, so let's get started with culture. I'm going to start with Sidney Crosby. So Sidney Crosby won't sign a team jersey until he's played a regular season game in it. DeMar Rosen used to play for the Raptors, plays for Chicago now. He kisses the back of both of his hands at the start of each basketball game. Now, these are all just superstitions, and they amount to wishful and hopeful thinking, but such superstitions amount to athletes. These are common. And in fact, back in the 70s, there was a study that found that 137 intercollegiate athletes at the University of Western Ontario in Ontario, of course, practiced 6.6 superstitions each on average. So superstitions are widespread because they perform a useful social function. Research shows that in general, superstitions help athletes reduce anxiety and improve confidence and performance. And it's not just athletes who invent routines to help them stop worrying or to focus on the job at hand. Soldiers that go into battle, university and college students about to write an exam, and other people in high-stress situations behave similarly. Some people will wear a lucky piece of jewelry or an item of clothing. Others say special words or a quick prayer. Still others cross themselves. And then there are people who engage in more elaborate rituals. For example, sociologists at the University of Manitoba interviewed 300 university students about their superstitious practice before final exams. Now, one student felt she would do well only if she ate a sausage and 2 eggs sunny side up in the morning of each exam. Now, the sausage had to be arranged vertically and on the left side of her plate, with the eggs placed to the right of the sausage, so they formed 100, as in 100%, and she was aiming for. Now, the ritual may not have had a direct influence on her, may have had a more direct influence on her cholesterol level than her grade, but indirectly, however, it may have had a desired effect to the degree that it helped relieve her anxiety and to relax her. She may have done better on the exam. Who knows? These are all elements of cultures, and we're going to look at culture. Now, culture is a socially transmitted ideas. Now, socially, so that's among people, transmitted, communicated these ideas, practices, material objects, things that we desire and would want to purchase, that people create to deal with relief problems. So what we're going to do is we're going to be covering in this chapter over 2-week period, week 3 and week 4. In week 3, we're going to look at culture and society in this changing world, and we're going to explore some of the basic components of what is culture. In week 4, we're going to look at technology, cultural change, and diversity, and we're going to explore the sociological analysis of culture, and we're going to consider culture in the future. So let's get started. As the world grows smaller, cultural acceptance and tolerance for views as well as cultures of others becomes increasingly important for our collective well-being. Culture refers to the knowledge, language, values, customs, and material objects. Now, material objects will be things that we purchase or own that we could show people. Your house, books, clothing. So material objects that are passed from one person to another person and from one generation to the next. So, That's a pretty big mouthful of stuff that's involved in culture. So where a society is made up of people, culture is made up of the ideas, behavior, and material possessions of that group of people. All right? Now, we've talked in the previous chapter about micro and macro level investigation, and we're going to start here with a macro level, and it can be stabilizing force, these cultural elements. When we look at the overall big culture of society, we'll look at Canada. Well, at the macro level, when we look at Canada, culture is a stabilizing force or a source of discord, conflict, and even violence. And we've been seeing both of these things in the last few years with our pandemic. It's been very difficult. We have some very good things that occur, and we have discord and conflict that occurs based on the one culture within Canada. Now, at a micro level, it remains essential for individual survival since it remains the only way, the only medium that equips us with the skills needed for successfully social living. Now, as Canadian society becomes more diverse and communication between members of international cultures more commonplace, the need to appreciate all diversity and to understand how cultures view the world has also increased. Now, I've already sort of mentioned, material culture. So sociologists make a distinction between material culture, which are the physical creations of societies that members in society make, use, and share. So like I said, clothing, houses, cars, cell phones, and etc. And then the non-material culture. Now, these are the abstract or the intangible human creations of society. This would include things like your beliefs, our symbols. Symbols can include language, our values, and norms. The way we introduce one another is how we do it in our country may not be the same as it's done in other countries. Now, this also includes gender rules, our laws, our family patterns and how we go through marriage, our political system, our faith. These are all non-material cultural components. Now, bridging the two, both the concrete and the abstract, or the material and the non-material, is technology. Technology which, while it refers to knowledge and techniques and tools that transform resources into usable forms, it also includes the knowledge and the skills required to use these forms after they are developed. Now, because all humans face the same basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's the lowest rung, it's referred to anthropologist George Murdoch as cultural universals. Now, while the specific expression of these universals may vary, all cultures have four common, non-cultural components. Okay, now the first one that we share universally are symbols. Symbols are anything that meaningfully represents something else. Look at the Canadian flag. As an example, is a symbol, and it represents something that we can appreciate and represents what Canada is about. Now, the second element is language. Now, language is the ultimate set of symbols, both verbal and nonverbal. Then this underlies, of course, communication. And then thirdly, there are values. Values are the collective ideas about what's right and what's wrong in Canada, what's good and what's bad. And then fourth, there are norms. Now, norms are established rules or standard rules of conduct, how we're supposed to behave. And we're going to look at each of these a little bit more closely. And we're going to begin with symbols. As mentioned, symbols are anything that meaningfully represents something else. Symbols can function to produce many things, from loyalty to animosity, from love to hate to patriotism. Now, it's really important to note that there may be one symbol, but the symbol may be interpreted differently by various cultures. And that's an important element. Media Commercials for beer, for example, clothing, cosmetics, medication, all depict who their market is. Who are they marketing to, and what is it to be considered desirable? It's all symbolic. So we explore a little further on language. Language is a set of symbols that express ideas and enable people to think and communicate with one another. Now remember, not all cultures have the same language. Therefore, the letters and the numbers are the symbols when combined to make a language, and all cultures have language. So we don't all have the same language, but that's one of the common universal traits. The sharing of stories provides a social reality and shared past. Now, you can check the video that I posted on body language. It's in week 3. It's put out by Desmond Morris, an anthropologist. It's a bit of an older video, but it's pertinent. Now, when looking at language, sociologists are also interested in how language affects our social reality. In other words, does language create our reality, or do we use language to communicate what we see in our reality? Well, Edward Sapir and Benjamin Whorf both are anthropological linguists, and they coined the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Now, essentially, they hypothesize that language shapes our view of reality. So our language creates our perception. Now, many sociologists suggest that they are not so supportive of suggesting that language causes our reality. However, they will state that language likely influences our behavior and interpretation of our social reality. So it's a very unclear statement, and it's not important that it be clear and absolute. It's just important that we're exploring what role does this all play. Now, we can touch on language and gender, because this becomes a very important element, not just in sociology, but when we look in particular, I teach a course in gender studies, and when we look at gender, language plays a critical role. And this is really complicated topic than it really appears. The course I teach is looking at gender and looking at culture, language, and gender. And what cultural assumptions about women and men does language reflect? Because one of the key things is there's the biological differences between men and women, and then there are the gender differences. Well, the biological are biology. Gender is socially constructed. How we view what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman in Canada is not the same as how other countries will define those same two characteristics. If you check the example in your text on page 65 of a few English language intersections of culture and language, it's kind of interesting. Now, there may be attempts to make headway in addressing some cultural and language shifts to be more equitable and non-sexist forms. And that's part of what the feminist perspective has been shaping more in society, as a more equitable and non-sexist form of language. We can also consider language, race, and ethnicity. As with gender, culture and language can also transmit or reinforce perceptions of race and ethnicity. Again, check in the example in your textbook on page 64. Now, language diversity in Canada is quite possible that you can call Canada a linguistic diversity, as there are at least 200 languages spoken in Canada, with 2 official languages, making Canada bilingual. In 1969, the Official Language Act was passed, making French and English the official languages of Canada. The census profile, you'll see it, I think I put it behind me there, shows the most Canadians speak either French or English. However, other languages are also spoken. You'll see that on the other graph. Much of the Indigenous is diverse and varied, captured in their oral culture regarding their histories, families, lands, and traditions. Now, another component of culture, and we've touched on just in the beginning part, is values. Values are collective ideas. Now, when we say collective ideas, we're meaning it's all of Canada. That's collective, a group of people, ideas about what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad, what is desirable and undesirable in a particular culture. For example, we might value good health, intelligence, knowledge, freedom. Commonly held values hold societies together, as well as set them apart. In Canada, the similarities and the differences of Quebec, Newfoundland, Alberta, similar and different. Elements of values are criteria by which we evaluate others, objects, and events. Often they're done in pairs, more like opposites, good and bad, brave, cowardly, hardworking, lazy. They're very general in their orientation. Now, as you might have guessed, there could be some value contradictions. And this is where values that conflict with one another. We may support the value and protection of Canadian natural beauty. However, we also support the sustainable use of natural resources. So they may be somewhat competing values. Now, some of what are considered Canadian core values, well, these things include equity and fairness in the democratic society, consultation and dialogue, accommodation and tolerance, support for diversity, compassion and generosity, Canada's natural beauty. Now, Canada's world image, we've generally been viewed as a commitment to freedom, peace, and nonviolent change. Something we should touch on as well, there's an element that we can call ideal versus real culture. In this case, here, sociologists recognize that there is a culture we profess to hold and support, that's the ideal culture, and the values that are followed on a day-to-day basis. That's the real culture. Norms, this was the third bigger group of what makes up culture. Norms are the third component of culture. Norms are the established set of rules of behavior or standards of conduct. Norms encourage predictability, stability, and organization of society. For example, marriage is still valued in our society. Norms tell us how to be a good husband or a good wife. Non-smoking is valued, and so the value may be, in fact, around good health and politeness. The norm would be to smoke or smoking, where you smoke or your etiquette about smoking. Now, some of these norms can be something that we will be informed about. I don't wear long pants ever. I wear short pants all day, every year for 43 years. So when I'm out in the wintertime in my shorts, the norm is dress appropriately for the weather. I get all kinds of feedback from people that I'm not conforming. It's not a law, but it does disturb people. So norms, and we look at this example, norms can be formal, which are written down as laws. They are enforced by sanctions. You could be sanctioned rewards for appropriate behavior and punishment for inappropriate behavior. Norms can also be unwritten. And this is where my example comes into play. There's unwritten standards of behavior that are understood by people who share the common identity. When I wear shorts, I get questions about my sanity. I get stares. I have people take pictures of me. You can't believe it. So these aren't laws, but they are things that breach what other people think is normal. Norms can be described as folkways, mores, or laws. And we'll touch on each of those. Folkways are these informal norms, everyday sort of customs that we sort of violate without any serious consequence. Now, you can put my shorts into that category, but it's also inclusive of things like teeth brushing. Maybe you chose not to brush your teeth today. There's no law that says you can't do that. You might offend some people with your breath, but there's no law. Or the kinds of clothing that we wear, the gestures that we'll use, religious fasting, the kinds of cars we buy, green or otherwise, are all examples of that. Now, mores, this is a step more severe, if you will. These are strongly held norms with a moral and an ethical connotation that may or may not be violated without serious consequence in a particular culture. Now, sexual morality are also known as taboos. Now, for example, incest is a taboo, is an example of a taboo. Now, the next level are more significant, and that's laws are formal, standardized norms that have been enacted by legislatures and are enforced by formal sanctions. So we're going to get into a lot more of that when we get into the chapter on crime and deviance. So this will be really just expanded then. So we're not going to go into a great deal of detail on laws. That will come back later on crime and deviance. All right, so there we've done the first part on culture, and that was this week. Next week we'll do part 2 on culture, all right? I hope this is going well for you. So far, so good. Keep up the good work, and we'll see you next week. Bye now.